And I always said this:
Wow.
athletics is a microcosm for life, and if you can survive athletically, you can survive in life. And I see signs now that say uncoachable kids become unemployable adults, and there's some truth to that.
Wow.
There's
Wait, whoa,
some truth
whoa,
to
whoa, whoa. Say that again. Say that again. Uncoachable
uncoachable kids
kids.
become unemployable adults, because
Wow.
basically we are living in a society where people say um, it's always somebody else's fault. We lack responsibility and accountability in our society, so we're always pushing it on somebody else. But when
Wow.
you're in that athletic realm and you're one on one with somebody, and it's either you or that person, there's no way to put the blame on somebody else.
Hey, 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 Entre Leaders. Happy Wednesday, and welcome to the 41st episode of the Leaders Lab podcast. Today, I am so honored and privileged for today's special guest. You know, I've had other guests up here, and y'all know they're my brother from another mother. But today, I have my brother from the same mother on the Leaders Lab podcast on today, and I'm really excited, and you're going to see one of the reasons why uh, uh, I have had to make sure that I become successful in life, because coming behind the footsteps of today's guest is just wow. Okay, so first, let me tell you just a little bit about this black man on the move. He's a Baltimore native. He received his formal education from Baltimore City Schools, Camden City Schools, and Roanoke Rapids City Schools. He received his BS in history from Chowan College, his teaching licensure through North Carolina Wesleyan University, his MSA in school administration, and he is currently pursuing a PhD in curriculum and instruction. Now, after teaching and coaching for Roanoke Rapids High School for 9 years, he moved on to Northwest Halifax School as the head football coach for 6 years, head baseball coach for 4 years, and then the athletic director for 2 years. After leaving Halifax County Schools, he became the assistant principal at Weldon High School, and 2 years later became the principal of Weldon Middle School, where he enjoyed a successful run for 5.5 years. He was named the Weldon City Schools Principal of the Year 2 consecutive years in a row, and later became the Chief Operations Officer for Warren County Schools. And just last month, today's very special guest accepted the position of Interim Chief Operations Officer for Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools, which is one of the premier public school districts in the state of North Carolina. And he has been married to his lovely wife, Christina, for the past 22 years. And they have 2 sons, André Jr., who is now a freshman. Y'all, Jesus have mercy. The babies is getting old. He is a freshman at Elizabeth City State University. And then we also have Eric, who is a sophomore in high school. Let me just bring him on so you all can give him a Leaders Lab welcome to our guest today, Mr. André Stewart. I want to call him, you know, for years we call him Coach Stewart, Principal Stewart. Now is interim chief operations officer. So I don't even know what to call him. I call him Dre. Okay, I've always called him Dre, but everyone else calls him Stu. First of all, it's just so much, all this just excellence, all of this excellence happen. Can't call it black excellence, white excellence. It's just excellence. We want to say welcome. Thank you so much for joining us on the Leaders Lab podcast today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, I know your mom about passed out.
True. This is true.
She gonna be like, Lord, I didn't know.
Yes, yes. Unlike her, we were able to keep secrets and not be able to tell everything. She don't have that.
Yes. This is going to be a huge surprise to her. We love you, Mom. So first, okay, let's just see. You have this incredible track in education. Did you start off wanting to be in education? Like, did you choose education, or was it just something where you were kind of like, oh well, this is let's just see where this takes me. How did you get started in education?
Well, education is the field of education is something that has off and on run through our family lines. That's one thing, and I was fortunate enough to have some quality educators in my life that kind of affected me in a positive way. Um, in my bio, when you were talking about where I was educated at publicly, moving from the north to the south, in the eighth
Mm,
grade is when we moved to North Carolina. And
mm-hmm,
so I finished out eighth grade in high school in North Carolina, which was a real cultural shift for me, because I
mm,
went from being around a lot of black and brown children to not
mm-hmm.
being around a lot of black and brown children, and being, and sometimes, um, one of only two or three, minorities in a classroom. But I had some
Wow.
really good teachers, like my typing teacher in high school, Miss Catherine Bell, the late Miss Catherine Bell. She was a black teacher in a predominantly white school when I came through in the early '90s. And my French teacher, I took 1 year of Spanish and then I switched over to French. And Sarah Johnson, who still lives in Williamsburg, and is
Wow.
a very active friend of mine on Facebook. She was really insightful for me. So people like that, and I loved history.
Okay.
Numbers and facts and stuff like that really came natural to me. So when I went to college, I wanted to study history, but there's just not a lot of jobs out there for straight historians. So
Yeah.
I wound up going into getting a bachelor's in history with a concentration in education. And then after I graduated, that's when I went in lateral entry back then, which
Okay.
doesn't even exist in North Carolina anymore. They don't even let people do lateral entry
Wow.
teaching anymore. So it's totally different now. But
That
that's
must
kind
have
of
been a
how I got
recent
an
shift,
education.
though, right?
It
That was a
it's
recent
been
shift.
in the last 5 7 years. They've done away with the lateral
Wow.
entry program the way it is, and they've totally restructured it. But you've got a whole different paradigm shift too with schools now too. You have restart
Okay.
schools and different
Okay.
things like that. So
Okay. Okay. So as you were saying, and I apologize, I cut you off, but I just, for me, hearing that the lateral entry, because I thought it was something that was still active. So
mhm,
hearing that that was done away with was, it kind of caught me off guard. But
mhm.
so continue on, please, as you were saying.
No, and that's kind of how I came into the educational side. The other side was I was always athletic and I liked athletics and I wanted to coach after my years of playing were done. So after I finished playing football at Chowan, I wanted to be able to, be able to give back to the community on
Mm,
the coaching side. So teaching was another way that I could do that. So in '98 is when I began my teaching career. And I wasn't licensed at that time. So I was a long term substitute at Roanoke Rapids High School. And I worked on
mm-hmm.
um, my licensure and I was a long term sub for Tracy Lynch. And this goes back into how if you walk upright, the Lord will order your steps. So at the time that I came into education in '98, um, Chris and Tracy Lynch. I still know them and keep up with them, and they run help with their in-laws run a very successful printing program, Lynch's Office Supply in
Okay.
Roanoke Rapids. That's them.
Oh
Uh,
yeah. Yeah.
but Chris and Tracy were trying to have a baby at that time, and after I think a failed attempt, um, Tracy got pregnant again, and she got pregnant as I was coming in, and I was her long-term sub. So she went out in like October of that
Mm,
year. And she told me, she said, Andre, if we can swing it, if Chris and I can swing it, I'm not coming back. She had plans not to come back. And that's how I got my first teaching job. So I worked with her and I was a
wow.
long-term sub. And when she went out to have her son, um, who is like 22 now, 23. Um,
Wow.
she did not come back. And I think she did get back into teaching eventually because I think she went back into Rocky Mount, Nash County
Hmm.
schools, but she didn't come back to Roanoke Rapids. And that's how I started my tenure, my 9-year tenure at Roanoke Rapids High School, teaching social
Wow.
studies when Tracy Lynch left out.
So you actually went from coaching to teaching and coaching,
Mhm.
and um, you've always had students who or team members, your athletes would as your sister, I was happy to be at the school where you were until I got kicked out of the school and had to go to let's just thanks a lot, Roanoke Rapids. I got kicked out of Roanoke Rapids High School. But it was kind of cool to be like, there, and they're like, "Hey, you're Stu's sis." I was like, "I don't know who Stu is, but yes, I am Dre's sister." And so, but it was cool being there. And then just to hear, like, I mean, all the kids loved being in your class, and also your players. And the thing that was important for me was to see that you didn't just have like black players that loved you. You had white players that loved you. Like all of it, just it didn't matter the ethnicity. Like all of your students loved you. What was it? What was it about your coaching style, or about just your representation, a male representation there, that helped your students, whether they were in the classroom or on the field?
I think I'm gonna fast forward and then rewind. When I
Okay.
became a principal in Weldon City Schools, when I moved to Weldon Middle School, Dr. 𝗖𝗟𝗏𝙗𝙚 was the superintendent of Weldon City Schools at that time, and he's now a big time superintendent in Portsmouth, Virginia.
Okay.
But he told me, he said, "Stewart, this is getting ready to be your biggest coaching job." He said, "It's going to be your biggest and most important coaching job going in to be
Mm,
principal." And I think that's kind of the mindset I've always taken, um, is that going into the classroom and going into the educational realm has been like a coaching job for me.
mm,
And getting people, you in coaching, you have to gain the trust of people before
mm.
you can teach them anything. So you have to build relationships and build connections before you can do that. I think at the time when I went into Roanoke Rapids, I distinctly remember that we had a large, Roanoke Rapids has always had a fairly large school, the high school.
Yeah.
Um, and so you're talking upwards of 800 to 1,000 students at that time. And
Mm.
so you have to have a teaching force to be able to man those students. But distinctly remember at that time when I started teaching at Roanoke Rapids that we had 3 African American teachers on the staff, and that was it. And so, first of all, for my students of color, um, they looked at me as, "Whoa, there's a young black man teaching here."
Yeah.
Um, and also for my white students, they kind of looked at it the same because many of them that came up through the Roanoke Rapids system had never had a black teacher,
Yeah.
and especially a black male teacher, because education is dominated by females in the public school
Yeah.
system. So a black male teacher was something that was, kind of difficult. Well, not difficult, but it was unique. It was different.
Rare. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, in coaching them, um, that's kind of how we built relationships. So, uh, I did a lot of things in education. I stumbled on some things that are now
Okay.
like considered cutting edge. So,
Okay.
as I work
Okay.
on my PhD, um, one of the things that I've been talking about is real world experiences and making,
Mm.
things come alive. Well, I was doing that in the 90s, with kids.
Yeah.
We, related to where they're from. So when I taught um, social studies and when I taught civics, we use schoolhouse rocks. I'm just a boy on
Yeah.
Capitol Hill. We use those things because otherwise it didn't make sense, to
Yeah.
students. When you talk about voting, how do you relate voting to 15-year-olds who can't vote?
Right.
So, we
Yeah.
use real world things, and, we kind of opened it up to make it make sense to people. And that's kind of how those connections were built. And I think the other part of it was that all of my students and all of my players will always tell you the one thing about me is that I was always 100% genuine with them.
Yeah.
So it was what it was, and it is what it is. So I would tell them um, the 100% truth, the gospel truth. A couple weeks ago, I was back at Roanoke Rapids because things in life come full circle. So now I no longer coach, but Eric is 15. He's a sophomore. He's a starter on the Roanoke Rapids football team. So he's a starter on the
Wow.
defensive side. And I just wanted to be a parent, kind of like I did with Andre and watch him play last year. But they taught me into doing radio and being the color analyst for the radio. So I do that
Wow.
on Friday nights for the football team, and it's an opportunity to talk football. And people tell us that they really enjoy it, but for me, I'm just talking football because I know a little
Yeah.
football and I get to talk it. Um,
Yeah.
but they had homecoming a couple weeks ago, and that's where I was going with that. And I saw one of my former players from the early 2000s, and he came up to me, he hugged me, had his wife with him, and
Wow.
he was like, he said, "I want you to meet this guy. He was tough on me," and basically what he was saying was by being tough on him, it helped him grow into the man that he is today. And I always said this:
Wow.
athletics is a microcosm for life, and if you can survive athletically, you can survive in life. And I see signs now that say uncoachable kids become unemployable adults. And there's some truth to that.
Wow.
There's
Wait, whoa,
some truth
whoa,
to
whoa, whoa. Say that again. Say that again. Uncoachable
uncoachable kids
kids.
become unemployable adults. Because
Wow.
basically we are living in a society where people say um, it's always somebody else's fault. We lack responsibility and accountability in our society. So we're always pushing it on somebody else. But when
Wow.
you're in that athletic realm and you're one on one with somebody, and it's either you or that person, there's no way to put the blame on somebody else. Um, Football, when I was coaching football, the ultimate team sport, you have to rely on your teammates, and 10 guys can do their job on the field, and one guy cannot do his job, and you get beat. So you
Yeah.
have to rely on each other, but you also have to be accountable for your assignment in doing your job. Same thing in baseball. You got to know where you're going with the baseball, what you're supposed to do. You got to execute all of those types of things. So, you know, I was very tough on those guys to make sure they knew their assignment and they could execute. And there are some things, yes, athletic ability is a huge key in it. I
Mm.
tell my boys all the time now, at 18 and 15, they're far better in the sports that they played than I was at their age. And
Wow.
it's not because of, it's for a myriad of reasons.
Okay.
They are their training regiments and their athletic ability and all of those things have taken them further, but they understand that when you're on the field you have to perform. So
Yes.
they
Yeah.
carry that over to the classroom, and there is
Wow.
no excuse that you can make when you don't perform. So there is accountability. I had a earlier this year I had a really interesting relationship because I've gone through a parental paradigm shift with two teenage boys. Um,
Okay.
so I went from always being really, really tough on them about everything to kind of being open and listening
Mm.
and offering not their friend, but I offer them suggestions and realize that um, when you go hard on people, they will shut down at times. Um, I
Yes.
think my
Yes.
kids know and understand now that they're in a different era. So, and my oldest son, Andre, he had an opportunity to coach with me this past summer. So as I was finishing up coaching, and I'm pretty much done with coaching now, but I coached baseball on the all-star baseball team. So Andre
Okay.
was one of my assistants and Eric played on the team. And what
Wow.
Andre learned, he told me at one point during the season, he said, you have gotten really soft. He said, you have never allowed me to get away with this. And I said, well, what you have to understand is these children are not you, and they're not cut from the same cloth. So in order to
Mm.
get them to perform, we have to learn to motivate them in a different way. So Andre
Wow.
was a child that I could motivate by being direct and being very hard on. Eric is not
Yeah.
that child. So,
Okay.
even with my own two children, I've learned that um, different ways and forms of motivating people, but making sure that they get the point that you have to compete. Um, and
Mm.
because once they get that in them, then they can go to work. They can hold a job.
Yeah.
You can have a bad day at work and you won't quit because you learned I have to keep coming back because I'm responsible, or I have to keep coming back because I have bills to pay. I have to keep coming back because there's so much that I have to do, just as a man, and
Hmm.
that's kind of what some of my former players will tell me that I help them with. And I mean, I was hard on some of these guys, but they keep up with me on social media.
Hmm.
They will comment on things. They will say, coach, you helped us out, and they're all walks of life. So
Right.
they're from, some of them are in education, some of them in law enforcement, some of them work in forestry.
Wow.
It's across the board. So, I have former students at this point that are, ooh, they're pushing 40. Some of those early
Hmm.
guys that I coached they're 40 years old. So
Yeah.
it's amazing that you see that, and they have been able to take the life lessons out of athletics, because that's what it's about. You're not going to win state titles and all that kind of stuff, but if you get the life lessons out of it, that's what it's for.
So many of these life lessons that you have taught others, were these life lessons that you had taught to you, or was it something that you ended up just like you were learning while you were teaching it? Because honestly, I believe that every good teacher doesn't teach from the stance of expertise. They
Right.
teach from the stance of exploration.
Right.
They're as they're learning, they're also teaching to learners. And so, how was it something that you had already learned, or was it something that you were learning in the process, especially as a young Black man growing into these roles and positions over time?
It was definitely something that came about through the process. It was not something that I learned. I learned early on that the classes that they teach you in, the educational classes, will never prepare you for the classroom. They will never prepare you for everything that happens and the situations that arise.
Ah,
I have seen so much in education. And one thing the classes never teach you is that when you do it the right way, the emotional attachments that you have with people, that go on
yeah,
forever, for a lifetime.
yeah.
I have had, and just today, I just got word probably an hour ago that one of my former parents, when I was a principal, has passed, and I've had several of those
Oh,
this year that children, and some of these children still in high school, that their parents
jeez.
have passed, and or some of my former players are losing parents and going through things. So that emotional
Mm,
attachment is nothing that they ever teach you um, in college courses, and you can't find it in the textbook. And the same was with just learning. When I was the youngest, of course, of the three African American teachers at Roanoke Rapids High School when I started teaching. The other
okay.
two were Ronald and Vanessa Smith, and they were
Okay.
a married couple, and they were older at that point. And I think Vanessa was doing Exceptional Children, and Ronald was doing carpentry. So, I was
Okay.
teaching a core subject, and Roanoke Rapids went from, when I graduated, Roanoke Rapids may have been 20% Black, maybe.
Mm, mm,
And it was growing and shifting. So the numbers of minorities was on the move when I went back to teach there. And one of the things that I could see was that there was a lot of inequity, um, and discipline, um, and misrepresentation, and discipline numbers and referrals to the EC program, things that we're still
Wow.
fighting, statewide and nationwide,
Yeah.
uh, right now. The
Yeah.
fact, and we talk about that a lot in Chapel Hill, Carrboro City Schools, is equity, with everything that we do, and keeping equity at the lens of everything we do. And how do we close the achievement gap? And that was something that I had great success with, as a principal, is learning, to teach teachers, and teach adults. Teaching kids is one thing. Teaching adults is something that's totally different.
Yes.
Kids are easy, and
Yeah.
people say, "Oh no, you don't know about the class." I have seen everything that you can see in the classroom. I have seen everything
Yes.
that you can see in the school. I have done it all. I've done it all from, taking a fully loaded gun from a child, to a
Jeez.
child, one of my students passing away, to being in the floor with children having seizures, uh, to,
Wow.
um, teachers, pregnant teachers thinking they're going into labor in school. I mean, I've run the gamut. I've fights on the bus breaking down, going to the, scene of a bus accident, taking
Yeah.
children to the hospital after games, children being injured. Done all of those things. So it's not, like I said, calling DSS, and having to deal
Yeah.
with situations with DSS that are just unsavory, and things that I've had to call DSS and deal with them, with people that I know, on a professional level.
Wow.
So that's real difficult stuff. So I've seen a lot in the classroom, but it goes back to that accountability and responsibility model, and how you handle things. So when I was coming along as a teacher, one thing that I learned was that you need to really know, this is the hill that I'm willing to sacrifice myself on. Okay.
Yeah.
What am I willing to stand up for? Um, who am I willing to be a voice for? And I think that's the group. When I was in Roanoke Rapids, that was the group. I was the kind of the representative for the, not just the Black and brown children, but for the socioeconomically challenged, white children as well. Um, and that was one of those things, that, it was very interesting. The My tenure in Roanoke Rapids ended, um, with children and part of the community really up in arms, because I interviewed to be the head football coach in Roanoke Rapids, and I was not given the opportunity to. And I can talk about these things now because I'm fully over them.
That's
Um,
what I was going to say. That that part now. So especially when we're talking about, you were talking about you said equity achievements, I believe.
mhm,
Okay, so that's with the students, but even in your position though, because
mhm.
I remember thinking you were going to be with Roanoke Rapids High Schools forever because it was just there was so much love for you there. Seemingly there was so much love for you
Mhm.
there, um, and so but you applied for that head football coach position,
Mhm.
and what happened?
So I want you to know and understand something that I said, to somebody at work last week, and I'll go forward again and then backtrack. So
Okay.
I am, as the operations officer, the interim operations officer in Chapel Hill Carrboro City Schools. We have 12,000 students, and, I have 6 departments under my umbrella. They are
Wow.
transportation, facilities and maintenance, technology, security, um, sustainability, uh, and child nutrition. So,
Okay.
we're in charge of making sure we get them to and from school. They're safe while they're at school, feeding them, the buildings are right. All of those things fall under our, jurisdiction. And there,
Okay.
in those 6 departments, we probably have 250 people, or so that are working. So of the
Okay.
2,000 employees in the district, 250 of them are under our umbrella in
Okay.
operations. Um, Very similar to the position that I held in Warren County, um, just not as large as far as numbers. Okay.
Okay.
So that's a lot of responsibility
Mm.
for people. So, we have a cabinet, um, and our cabinet basically oversees the operations for the entire district. So that's my lane. I am probably less than a year away from, having PhD and being
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Stewart, but
Woo!
there are people in this world that won't see me for my suits, my ties, my shirts, um, my homes. There are folks that will always just see me for my size and the color of my skin.
Yeah.
So when you get to that place and you get to that understanding, um, that you have to live above and set the right example, because it's not just the example for me, but it's the example for everybody. So decisions and
Mm.
choices that I make are not just for myself, but they're for my sons and other um, children of color, as
Yeah.
well as for the example that I'm putting on in the minds of children that are not of color, that
Yeah.
black men can achieve. Black men can be status quo. We all don't walk around um, uh, looking like we want to rob people. We all
Right.
don't walk around. We all don't go to jail.
Right.
There are some
Right.
races and sects of people who don't know that we are high achieving, hardworking people. So, taking that
Mm.
back to Roanoke Rapids in my days there. Um, so in 2007, I had been the assistant head football coach for 6 years. 6 of my
Mm.
9 years, I was the assistant head football coach. Now, I worked on a staff that was very veteran, but
Okay.
for all intents and purposes, I was number two. And number one left and took another job. So you would
Okay.
think that number two would be in line to move up. And
Right.
at that time, I did interview for it. The way it went down is that I was told by the principal at that time that if it was her decision, it wouldn't be a decision. I would be the football coach. And I said, okay. So the next day, when she came back to me, she said, "You're going to have to go through the interview process." So I knew at that point what had happened. It was not so much at the school level. It was some people at the school level that were not with me, but I remembered somebody distinctly telling me that the football coach was the face of the athletic program. And my reply to that
Wow.
individual was, "So you're telling me you're not ready to have a black face as the head of the athletic program?"
Wow.
So
Wow.
the way it shook down, I interviewed for the job, and I had a 5-person panel interview, and I scored a perfect score of 50 on that interview. I was told this by the superintendent at that time. They had another gentleman who scored a perfect score, is 50 as well. Um,
Mm.
the only difference between us is that I was a graduate of Roanoke Rapids High School. I had worked there for 9 years. He was 50 years old and a white male at that time. And at that time, I think I may have been 30. And so they
Wow.
they chose him. And the superintendent called me in, sat me at his desk, and said to me, he said, he showed me the score sheets. He slid them across the table. He, slid me all the raw data. I'll never forget that. And he said, "Andre, in a couple years, he's going to need somebody to pass this off to." And I told the superintendent at that time, no disrespect to you, but what has the last 9 years been about? If he's going to need somebody to pass it to, you're passing me over. So if I'm not good enough now, I'm not going to take the chance that you'll pass me over again. So that is what actually drove me to be the head football coach at Northwest Halifax. And we were successful there at Northwest. And there were some things going out. I told you we had a veteran football staff at Roanoke Rapids.
Yeah.
None of
Yeah.
those guys interviewed for the job. They were all willing to work on the staff with me as the head coach.
Wow.
The kids campaigned, the kids had signs, they did things. So there was a lot of internal support, but the powers that be, bottom line, they were not ready to have a black face as the football coach. So I
How
was
did the
young.
other position come to be though? I mean, you was it that I want you to keep tell you said you were young, but how did that other position come to be? Like by this time were people just like, "Hey, there's a black football coach that is on the market." Like, how did
It
what
was
happened?
in every move that I've made in education and really in life, I have found out the way the Lord works with me is things happen quickly. So,
Yes.
um,
Yeah.
and it was so odd that I was going through this, and I'm still, even to this day, very close to the football coach who was there, who was the head football coach before. He was number one, and I
Okay.
was number two. And he had
Yeah.
moved on, and he had actually moved down this way to Orange County. And we were talking on the phone. I was laying on the couch, and he said to me, he said, "Andre, Harold Williams, the AD at Northwest, I think he's got a football opening." I said, "Okay." He said, "I'm going to call him." He said, "And you call him." I said, "Okay." So I called him, got in touch with the principal, probably interviewed a week later. After I interviewed, I came out. I was talking to the assistant principal, talking to the athletic director. The principal walked out. She looked at me. She said, um, "I'm going to recommend you to be the football coach here." She said, "I need to know an answer by tomorrow because I want to take your name to the board next week." So, within 10 days of one rejection, here was the door opening. And then that's pretty much how it has gone. And in many steps, that's how the Lord has blessed me. So, um, no set pattern of how it happens. Doors are open, and it's, are you willing to walk through them? So,
Yeah.
and I had, it's funny, the Lord will let you also be able to walk and correct errors. So I got
Okay. Well,
over,
explain that.
I got over, I left Roanoke Rapids the right way,
Okay. Okay.
physically,
What is the now? Hold on. I was about to say. Hold
physically
on.
I
Let me
left.
go. What is the right way to leave a place that rejects you? Not everybody rejects you, but that rejects you, and obviously you had to be hurt in some way. So, what is the right way to leave a place like that?
You don't burn bridges. You don't speak out of a place of hurt and emotion. And I had a lot of built up things going on that I could have
Okay.
spoke out of a place of hurt and emotion, but I chose not to. So I left in the right way, that I didn't burn the bridges.
Wow.
Now the football coach and I, we did not, as one of your old teachers said, Grady Williams, our horses didn't sit. And that's primarily because as I was leaving out, he called me into an office in the main office at Roanoke Rapids and asked me to sit down. And it went kind of like this. He said, "Name, age," and I said, "You know my name and you know how old I am." And he said, he had his glasses on. He snatched his glasses off his face. He turned, he looked at me. He said, "Why don't you put your ego aside, do what's best for these boys, and come coach football with me at Roanoke Rapids?" And I
This
said,
was the new coach.
this was a new coach coming in. And
The
I
new
said,
coach who nobody really knew like that. He didn't have
right,
9 years in the game.
right, right. Um,
Okay.
but they had set up this meeting between the two
Meeting.
of us. Right.
This meeting.
Meeting, right.
Okay.
That lasted about 2 minutes before I got up and walked out. So I did have some ill feelings in my heart toward him for
Okay.
some years. And to say that when we played those first years, because I went right down the street, I went, you know,
Yeah.
10 miles down the road. And
You went to the rivalry
I
school.
went to the rivalry school, and we played the last game of the season every year. So
Yeah.
the first year he wasn't very good, and we weren't very good.
Okay.
Um, and we played at the end of the year, and I beat him the end of the first year. And so
That
we
felt
walked
good. Don't even
across.
lie. That
It
felt
did.
real good.
It did. But we walked across and we shook hands. And it's usually just a quick handshake and you keep moving, going down the line.
Yeah.
And he shook my hand and he wanted to lecture me about um, not letting relationships go that I had built up over years. And I, at that point, I had about had enough of him. And I had to tell him, look, you need to get out of my face. The people who have been my friends are still my friends. And
Yeah.
I'm learning people for who they are. So
Yeah.
the next year, we were both better. We were a better team. And there is
Okay.
a fellow who writes, he writes for the News and Observer and for Carolina down here by the name of Jonas Pope. Jonas Pope is a great sports writer, but Jonas was working
Okay.
for the Herald at that time. And we played on Thursday night, JV on Thursday night. And so I brought my little young JV team from Northwest over there to play. And that coach hated me so much that he had 8 or 9 varsity players that were starters on the varsity team, but because they were in the 10th grade, he dropped them down to play JV.
That's not allowed, is it?
At that point, it was something called an 8-quarter rule, so he could get away with it. So he saved their 8 quarters of JV eligibility just to play against me. And I remember Jonas, and I remember it because it just came up in something. Jonas and I were on Instagram or Facebook, and he said to me, he said, Stewart, do you remember this night? And I said, I do. Because I remember saying, does he hate me this much that he would chance losing the varsity game to win a JV game, that the players? But that's how,
Wow.
so that's how it was built up. And so the second year, I came to Roanoke Rapids and I beat him again in Roanoke Rapids. So
Even though he had the other
right,
the
right. Now I will tell you after that point, because he had a run of athletes that came through after that point. And he had
Okay.
Kareem Martin that played in the NFL, and he had Nazir Jones that played in the NFL, and J.J. Patterson. He had a run of college and pro athletes. Now he beat me the next 3 years or so like that, because
Wow.
he just had, they were loaded.
Had enough. He had enough of you for the first 2 years. He was like, "You
Had,
gotta bring in some of the pros."
had. And at one point, oddly enough, at one point on my class 20th reunion for homecoming, class 20th reunion, they had me in there playing. So it was a lot,
Wow.
yeah. So, but after I got away from it a little bit, I began to figure out that I had hardened my heart, especially toward him, and
Mm.
towards some of those people. And I used to show my kids a movie when I was teaching segregation in civics. I used to show
Okay.
them The Ghost of Mississippi with Whoopi Goldberg.
Okay.
And The Ghost of
Okay.
Mississippi is a movie about the killing of civil rights leader Medgar Evers, and
Okay.
talks about how Medgar Evers was gunned down right in his driveway as he was coming home from work. And Byron D. LeBeckwith killed Medgar Evers in cold blood. And I remember there's always a line in that movie that I remember Whoopi Goldberg saying. And she said, Medgar used to say, when you hate, the only person that you hurt is you. Because most people
Mm.
don't care about it and others don't
Mm.
know. So a lot of times we
Wow.
hate people who either don't care or don't
Or
know.
don't know.
So,
Wow.
I had to learn to let that stuff go and find out that this was the chosen path that God had for me. It was not God's will for me to be the football coach at Roanoke Rapids High School,
Yeah.
and that's fine.
Because honestly, you might still be there to this day. There might not have been any
That's
type of
exactly right.
progression, right?
That's
You
exactly
might have
right.
been held back.
That's
Wow.
exactly right. So I had to go the route that God wanted me to go. I had to go into the county, not just for athletics, but I had to go into the county to learn how another system and another group of people and another group of kids lived and how they operated, how I could be a vessel to help them to be able to move over and then to move up. And, but you're
Mm.
exactly right. I could still be on the sidelines if I was, but the hurt from that initial one,
Yeah.
it hurt for a while, but then I had to learn to grow, you know. So, and I
Mm.
remember back to all the times, broken bones, and I broke 3 bones in my athletic time. They hurt really bad initially, but when they grow back stronger. You know, bones
Wow.
don't break in
You
the
better
same
come on.
bones don't
Say
break in the same
that.
place because they come back and they grow back stronger. So, those
Wow.
places that I was broken in, it's fine. So when I left the sidelines of football, oh, in 2012, I guess, I was fine. It was a completed career for me, and I had a lot of great moments at Northwest as well. A lot of great players out there that I still keep up with. I had players out there that are coaching now.
Wow.
I have guys that I coached that are coaching, and they will call me and say, "Coach, I remember this," and so it's really unique, but it was time, for me to move on. And I've learned, for me, when I get kind of discontent in a situation, that's God's way of saying, okay, it's time for you to move. So
Say that again. Hold on.
yeah,
Say that again, because
yeah,
that just helped me a little bit. So when you get discontent, because
it's
obviously, like you have a relationship with God, so
mhm,
you can hear clearly. So when you start to get a little agitated or maybe just uncomfortable in the situation,
mhm.
you know that it's time for you to move.
It's
Like,
time to
how
move.
does
It's
that
time to do
work?
something different. Um, and usually it happens really quickly. So, it was the football situation in Roanoke Rapids that got me into Northwest. And at
Yeah.
Northwest, really the principal wanted me because I had extremely high test scores. I had
Okay.
test scores that they said they had never seen in US history and civics. I had kids that were, could pass the test with no problem because I knew how to teach it, and I wasn't just teaching
Wow.
the test, but I was teaching kids, this is how you think, this is how you process. Um,
Yeah.
so after a while there at Northwest, when circumstances arise and enough people had retired, enough people had gone, and I was carrying the burden. When I stopped coaching football, I tell people that I fired myself. I literally said, I don't want to coach anymore. I'm done. It's worn me out. It's time for them to hear somebody else's voice. So I stepped down and stepped away. I really fired myself.
Wow.
When I stopped coaching baseball, it was the same way. I hired somebody else to come in and do that. And as the athletic director, I was kind of, tired of the same fights and the same struggles. And I know one of the things I always remember is that I was the football coach and the athletic director at Northwest, and we were playing Roanoke Rapids last game of the season. And I was looking across at Roanoke Rapids. I had myself and I had 4 paid positions under me at Northwest, and I had a couple volunteers. And I looked across, and Roanoke Rapids had like 10 coaches on their sideline,
Wow.
and I was probably the eighth or ninth. I would have been the eighth or ninth highest paid coach on their staff. That's how poorly we were being paid in the county at that time. So all of those things, what I'm saying is they were all working together to show me, okay, it's time to do something different. So, and here's that chance opportunity that, just like Tim Bennett calling me and saying, "Hey, Andre, I think Harold is looking for a football coach." Somebody called me and said, um, Weldon is probably going to be looking for some coaches and some things like that. And I was to the place I really was tired of coaching,
Yeah.
but
You don't want to
they
coach
said
anymore.
Dr. Bracy, is maybe looking for something. So I had finished my master's degree, and so I made a call, and they told me to come on in, and I was kind of in an interview for an assistant principal job when I realized I'm interviewing for an assistant principal job. And
You didn't even know.
yeah, I just grabbed a suit and a tie and went, and I'm in the interview, and I'm like, oh wait, this is an interview for an administrative job. So
They just said that Dr. Bracy
needs to meet with
had
you.
something, had
Needs to meet
something,
with
but
you.
they didn't say what that something was.
So I went in, I started meeting. He came in the boardroom, he sat down, he observed the interview for a few minutes, he got up and he left. He left me with 3 ladies that I knew. And here is the part about burning the bridge. I left Roanoke Rapids the right way, right? I didn't burn the bridges. So when I got to Weldon, the basically the assistant superintendent who was in charge of curriculum, who was running my interview in Weldon, just so happened to be the principal at Roanoke Rapids High School when I left.
The one who said that if it was up to her, she would be, you would be the, wow.
There it was. She was sitting there.
Wow.
So I was like, okay. So I went through that interview and they called me back and the principal couldn't be there. So they said, we want you to meet with the principal. So I went back, met with the principal in Dr. Bracey's office, and they called me about a day or so later and said, we want you to take the job as the assistant principal at Weldon High School. I said, okay, fine. So went in, and this all happened probably in like a 2-week time frame. I went in. That first year, we did some great things. Our test scores went up like 37 points that year, 37 percentage points. We put some great things in place. And after that, Dr. Bracey came in and he saw me and he said, Stewart, do you think you can run a school? I said, sure. Okay.
I love it. Sure.
He said, okay. And that was the end of the conversation. He walked away. So in June, I got a call that said, you have an interview for the principal of Weldon Middle School. You need to be here June the 18th at 4:00. Oh, okay. All right.
So wait, hold on. Wait. When did Dr. Bracey come into you and say, do you think you can run a school? Well, around what time? Because the call was in June.
Probably March. We had that.
Okay.
We had that 5-second conversation in probably March. Nothing else was said.
This 5-second conversation that happened in March. What was going on in your mind? Like when he came in to say that, was it like, okay, or he's playing, or maybe, taking over this school, or what was your thought process? Like, what was your thinking at that time?
I honestly didn't have a thought process. I was thinking we're in the 3rd round of observations. So I need to get down here and knock out these observations and put them into NESIS and do these post conferences with these teachers. And, because I'm systematic. I have to, work down my list to get things done. But, but we were good at Weldon High School because, I was taking care of discipline. I was rolling with a lot of things. I was working with a really good principal, Michelle Burton. And, we were having a good time. We were doing a lot of great things. So in June, I get this call and I go down and I interview for this job and I don't hear anything. So I said, okay. So I don't go to the board meeting in June, the end of June. And Michelle goes. She's principal of Weldon High School. And Michelle sends me a text that night and it says, bye-bye, Stu. They sending you to the middle school. Just like that. Okay.
Oh, okay. No, they didn't let you know.
So before Dr. Bracey could call me, Michelle had already texted me and told me. So then by the time he called me, I had heard from 3 other people that I was going to. And so he called me and told me.
Wow.
So, that started my stint at Weldon Middle School that went for 5.5 years. And basically what happened to me at Weldon is that I got to a place where I could not grow anymore. And that's another sign. So when discontent sets in, it's time to move. But also when you can no longer grow, it's time to move.
I hope you are enjoying today's episode. I want you to come back next week because we're going to continue this special guest segment for an additional episode. There was just too much goodness to cram all into one session today, or else you would be listening to a 2 to maybe 3 hour episode. And so I said, why don't I just break it up to have more goodness to share on next week. So that's exactly what we're doing for you. Please don't forget to like, subscribe. If you're listening to the audio version of this podcast, please check in the show notes of how you can connect with our special guest for today. Also, my details, my contact information is there as well. And if you are watching the video version on YouTube, I want you to comment in the section below, how are you liking the episode so far? What have you gotten from today's special guest? What is one takeaway that you have so far? I mean, I have several notes that I've already taken, but I want to know what is one takeaway that you've gotten so far out of just this first half of this segment. Please don't forget to tune in on next week's episode of the Leaders Lab podcast, as we are going to continue with our interview with our special guest for today. I'll see you guys next week in the lab.
Thank you for listening to the Leaders Lab podcast. Visit our website at www.drcharitytv.com.